This is part 3 of the Blake Lively 30-point document series. You can find it in the playlist that I've created for it. You can find it right here on my channel at Bocce Go Hawks. So when you go to Bocce Go Hawks, you just go to playlist, and it's right here on the left-hand side, the Blake Lively 30-point document series. So I have the first 2 up. Again, this is point 3. And let's go. So one of the things that I'm discovering as I'm going through these points is it's really should have been almost melted together, because so many of these accusations that Blake Lively does overlap with each other, meaning many of these things happened on the same day, even within the same moment. So it's hard to separate them almost, but I'm attempting to, since she separated them to make the list longer. So point 3 says, no more discussions to BL and or her employees about personal experiences with sex, including as it relates to spouses or others. And I want to say she loves to do the S's. She loves to add other people and others or employees, or spouses or others. She tends to want to make something stretch out larger. It's a pattern of hers. I almost wonder if I would look back in some of her interviews if we find patterns like this, or if this is a Ryan Reynolds pattern. This idea of making something larger, more expansive than the actual moment it's about. So that is point 3 that we're covering right now. So basically, what do we find when we look at the CRD, her first complaint that she filed in the Southern District of York, then her first amended complaint, and then her second amended complaint? Let's see, what does she share about point number 3? So the first time we see something about this point, it actually mixes with another point she makes. So I apologize if these videos are going to feel sometimes repetitive, because even though Blake Lively put 30 points on this list, again, they're pretty much the same things kind of overlapping multiple times on top of each other. And so that's why the repetition is going to be there. So for this one, she uses this allegation against Justin Baldoni as 2, maybe even 3 different points. This particular section that we're going to read, Blake Lively uses it in at least 2 of her points. I don't know if it's in more, we'll find out, but it's at least in 2 of her points. So you're going to hear that repetition because of that purpose. So she says here, after Miss Lively signed on to the movie based on a draft of the script, Mr. Baldoni, without Miss Lively's knowledge or consent, personally added graphic content, including a scene in which Miss Lively was to orgasm on camera. When Miss Lively objected to these additions, Mr. Baldoni insisted he had added them because he was making the film through the female gaze. The good thing about her saying that he said that in real time back in April 2023 is because we know that that's not just a talking point that Justin Baldoni started using to try to cover up his own whatever. He had always expressed to her that has always been his desire, was to do it through a female gaze. Now, mind you, obviously, as a dude, he may not know what a female gaze is. And it kind of shows, right, in his engagement with Lizzie Talbot when they discuss things. He uses words like grope, and she has to change the word, right? Or he assumes that women want to see his butt. And maybe women do. I'm not saying that women don't. But the assumption that would be a female gaze, probably people would have differing opinions of whether that's a female gaze or that's just him thinking that's what a female gaze is. But the intention was always that he desired that to be the case, right? And that's why he had those discussions with Lizzie Talbot. And ideally, he would have had that discussion with Lizzie Talbot and Blake Lively at the same time. But as a reminder, she said that she wanted to wait until filming started before she met up with Lizzie Talbot. And this is when sometimes people wonder if Alex Sachs was playing double agents. It was Alex Sachs that advised Justin to just go ahead and meet with Blake and walk her through the conversation he had with Lizzie Talbot. Bad advice, Alex Sachs. Horrible advice. Now, mind you, Justin did say he was open to do that if he needed to because he was concerned about scheduling, the timing, how much it would push things back because she didn't want to meet with Lizzie until they met, like when filming started. Because a lot of work happens before filming actually starts. So I recognize that Justin was open to doing it, but I wonder why Alex would not have had better advice as a woman to say, hey, you know what? Maybe it's not advisable that you be the one to communicate that. And that's why we got the intimacy coordinator in the first place, is to protect you and to protect Blake from having any misunderstandings about anything. And when Alex advised Justin to actually like just go and talk to Blake on his own in her penthouse, I don't know. CGO, so CHEGEO, has a TikTok, and she actually showed that there are cameras, most likely in the place where these like screaming matches that Ryan Reynolds, or not matches because he was the only one yelling, but these screaming sessions that Ryan Reynolds had with Justin Baldoni. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of the conversation that they had in regards to this was captured in those cameras. And so I would be surprised why Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds wouldn't offer those up as proof of these allegations that she's making, unless, again, it wouldn't prove anything of their allegation. So, uh, as Justin Baldoni said, many of these instances were like when Ryan Reynolds was home. So it's not like she was having these conversations without him there. I mean, sometimes she was, but some in the sense of like he was in the building most likely, but I don't think he was necessarily sitting down with them the whole time, kind of situation. Anyways, so it says when Miss Lively objected to these additions, Mr. Baldoni insisted he had added them because he was making the film through the female gaze. Although he agreed to remove the scenes, he made a last-ditch attempt to keep one in which the couple orgasmed together on their wedding night, which he said was important to him because he and his partner climaxed simultaneously during intercourse. Mr. Baldoni then intrusively asked Miss Lively whether she and her husband climax simultaneously during intercourse, which Miss Lively found invasive and refused to discuss. Now, mind you, obviously, Justin Baldoni's version is different in the sense that his version is she's the one who brought up a comment first and he responded to her. So this is a he said, she said situation, right? Who was telling the truth? So the fact that I'm not saying that if I'm not saying that I disagree with Blake saying that she found it invasive and refused to discuss if she wasn't the one that initiated the conversation. I get that. I understand that. However, if she was the one that said something and he responded back with his experience with his wife, it's less offensive, right? But I don't know. I guess when I read this, it gives the energy that Blake Lively has never experienced what Emily has experienced with Justin, in the sense of like, I'm not sure Ryan Reynolds cares enough to have that be a reality for Blake Lively, is what I gather from her own statement here. I think there's reasons why they seem to love having everything at the penthouse. I would think that most Blake Lively supporters would assume that the reason that she was requesting that was she just had a baby and it was convenient, the most convenient thing for her to have it at the penthouse. But I do think if there are cameras in their home, they capture a lot of conversations, a lot of things. All of those could be potentially used as evidence if they actually had evidence that Justin Baldoni was ever inappropriate with Blake Lively in her penthouse while her husband was there. So this is a repeat from point number 2. Again, I tell you, there's so much overlap in her accusations that it is hard to separate them. And maybe it would have been easier for me if I just consolidated all of them, maybe. But I just wanted these to be standalone videos. So this is one of those sections where I've already read it to you from point 2. And I will not read it again. I will let you pause this video and read it for yourself, just because I don't want to repeat myself. And you can watch point 2 if you want it read to you. But the thing that you find again, or at least I have found in reading Blake Lively's 30-point documents, is that she takes one incident and she extrapolates at least 2 things out of that one moment. So out of this one moment, she made it about 2 different accusations at the very least. There might be more. So for this one, this is him talking about sexual experiences. Also, right here with Baldoni and Heath, I've read that already in point 2. Same situation. You can pause and read this. This is a repetition of another accusation. This would still fall under talking about your sexual past, whether with your spouses or other people. You would notice that maybe she was saying right here when she's like, you can't say it in front of my employees, is because her assistant and driver were the ones that ended up being in the same space when Justin was talking about this story. And obviously, we're going to get to it in the first amended complaint, where it shows that the driver is actually her security guard because he served both purposes that day. Because people say that's actually something they've noticed, that her security guards are also sometimes her driver. So not gonna read that to you. You can feel free to pause and read this section as well as like this section right here. So I looked at the first complaint that she filed in the Southern District of New York on December 31, 2024, and it didn't have anything different than the CRD. So we're going into her first amended complaint. And in it, she just adds this line on paragraph 7, which says he divulged information about his sex life, and that's talking about Justin Baldoni. So this is a little bit of a side note from her point 3, but this kind of stands out to me. She says here, Miss Lively did not refuse to meet with the film's intimacy coordinator. She said she did not need to meet with her before production started because there were no intimate scenes in the immediate future, so they could talk once production began. Miss Lively did have a call with the intimacy coordinator during preparations. Those conversations happened close in time to the filming of the relevant scenes. Do you know why I find that interesting? First and foremost, she was supposed to have this filmed in Las Vegas, but like a family member got sick, something. But there's a reason why they had to cancel that shoot. But that was the shoot where they were supposed to have this intimacy scenes. Because she claimed the family member was sick, they didn't have any intimacy scenes until phase 2. And so this statement brings me a lot of questions, because she says that she only has this talk with the intimacy coordinator during preparations, and it happened close to the time of the filming of the relevant scenes. So is she saying she never spoke with anybody until phase 2? Because there were no intimacy scenes in phase 1. It's just a side note. I'm not expecting anyone to have an answer for me, but it stands out to me that she's saying that she actually didn't have a conversation until it was close to filming those scenes. Now, mind you, if she had that conversation right before Las Vegas, then maybe that's something. But again, she refused to sign her nudity rider. So she was pushing it off. And I believe, as someone had told me in my comment section a while back, that they believed it was because she wanted her body to be in a particular state before she was willing to do those scenes. But I find, again, it very interesting that she says they don't have this conversation until very close, or happened very close to the time of the filming of the relevant scenes, because those relevant scenes did not happen until phase 2. I just find that interesting. Maybe you won't, but I do. And so the same thing over here, you can pause and read. It's the same thing that we read in the other complaint, the same story. Also, you can pause and read here, same story as we read before in point 2. And this is when she discusses the fact that it's not actually her driver, but her security guard, but also the security guard that served as a driver that ends up being the one that like advises her not to ever be alone with Baldoni again, even though like literally you're a security guard, dude. Of course she's not going to be alone. You're literally paid to make sure she's not alone. Okay, so she did add a paragraph 94, where she says, in fact, Mr. Baldoni publicly acknowledges that he has struggled with consent. He echoed language similar to the words he spoke to Miss Lively in the car ride described above in a podcast interview, in which he admitted that he had crossed boundaries and lines in my teens and 20s with respect to obtaining consent, a flaw which is blamed on his exposure to pornography. You start to think that is what women want. And in porn, as we know, no means yes or try harder. This allegation, I'm sure she used, this paragraph is probably going to encompass like 3 allegations she has against him. So 1 incident, but 3 allegations. So she does this compounding thing. I'm just saying this because I'm not planning to read any of these things multiple times for people. I'm just going to ask you to pause and read it because it is just too repetitious. The examples that she gives, she doesn't really give very many examples of when these things happen, and when she does, she like doubles and triples up on the same incident. And then on paragraph 95, we've read together in another video as well, so you can pause and read it there. So the second amended complaint, again, the same thing as the first amended complaint, so we're not going to read any of those things. So we're going now into Wayfarer's lawsuit against the New York Times. And it says here, also misleading, the article draws on Lively's assertion that Baldoni improvised unwanted kissing and discussed his sex life. However, both the Times and Lively intentionally exclude that Lively refused to meet with the intimacy coordinator to plan out the film's sex scenes. Baldoni, in turn, was forced to meet with the intimacy coordinator alone and relay any suggestions to Lively separately. Notwithstanding Baldoni's reluctance, he and Lively would later sketch out the scenes together, absent the intimacy coordinator. As part of those creative discussions, Baldoni and Lively sought to personalize and develop their characters, and in doing so, engaged in conversation about their individual experiences. The Times, taking Lively's CRD complaint as true, characterizes this discussion as an inappropriate attempt by Baldoni to talk about his sex life. It was not. More still, Baldoni consistently acted at the direction of the intimacy coordinator. Those baseless accusations do not constitute sexual harassment. So, again, this is one of those situations where this passage is going to be discussed in another point. Because even though this is discussing about his own sex life, that's the portion, but even the act of discussing the potential scenes, she considered that SH. But it's all in the same conversation. So she takes one moment and she makes them separate points as if they happen in different times, but they're all about one incident. So this is why you're going to see this again when I cover that point in her 30-point document. So this portion is a little bit of a repetition, He says, contrary to Lively's assertion, it was she who refused to meet with the intimacy coordinator to plan out scenes, putting Baldoni in the awkward position of meeting with the intimacy coordinator alone and later relaying sex scene suggestions to Lively in the intimacy coordinator's absence, not only defeating the purpose, but resulting in accusations by the Times that before shooting began, Baldoni wanted to add sex scenes that Lively considered gratuitous. In fact, these scenes were proposed by the intimacy coordinator. This is well documented in handwritten notes Baldoni took during meetings with the intimacy coordinator. Baldoni's dated handwritten notes from his meetings with the intimacy coordinator, which again, Lively declined attending, were read to Lively at her penthouse, where she insisted she and Baldoni meet to write sex scenes together. As it was, the sex scenes were not written, and it was always Baldoni's intention for them to be written with input from both the intimacy coordinator and Lively, the female gaze that Lively distorts in her CRD complaint, which the Times then publishes. In response to a proposal from the intimacy coordinator that Ryle not orgasm after he satisfied Lily, Lively remarked, "I'd be mortified if that happened to me," to which Baldoni, following Lively's lead in what seemed like an attempt to connect and develop their characters, remarked that those have been some of the most beautiful moments with my wife and I. Lively again distorts this both in the protections for return to production she made Wayfarer, Heath, and Baldoni sign, and in the CRD complaint, which the Time publishes as fact without any investigation whatsoever. Okay, so I want to pause here real quick because technically the protections for return to production was not signed by Wayfarer or Baldoni. It was signed by Heath, and it was for It Ends With Us Movie LLC, not Wayfarer. So again, I was not a fan of the New York Times lawsuit as much, simply because I feel like there were inaccuracies in what they said. And fact is, Wayfarer and Baldoni did not sign it. I mean, I guess in extension, because Heath represent and It Ends With Us Movie LLC, but as we know, Wayfarer and It Ends With Us Movie LLC are separate entities for a reason. So they did not sign off on it. Only Heath, who was the president of It Ends With Us Movie LLC. Baldoni did not sign this. But obviously an extension of it, right? He kind of did in spirit, I suppose. First, this suggestion did not originate with Baldoni, and Lively knew this. Second, it was Lively who first personalized the scenes. And third, perhaps most importantly, they were writing scenes for their characters. What I find really interesting here is that they're saying Lively always knew that Baldoni was not the one who wrote up these scenes. So that, again, if true, gives the connotation or gives the impression that this was done with malice, that it was intentionally meant to deceive people, to say, he's the one who added it, when she knew that this was something that was discussed between him and Lizzie Talbot. Second, it was Lively who personalized the scenes. That I can genuinely believe. And the reason I can believe that is I see that over and over and over and over with Blake Lively. She has a hard time differentiating between herself and her character. And maybe, again, because she says she does not transform. And third, and perhaps most importantly, they were writing scenes for their characters. And I think, again, because Blake Lively seemed to have a very difficult time differentiating between herself and her character, I can see that she may have struggled here to realize, this is not a personal conversation, Blake. This is literally inspiration to talk about what our characters are going to become. But at the same time, you see this kind of melting of reality and character with even how Ryan Reynolds chose to promote It Ends With Us on his TikTok video. His caption talking about it's hard to see Blake or your wife having sex with multiple people or whatever. Which, one, she didn't. She had one, just Ryle. And two, it's not Blake. It's Lily. It's her character. And so whenever you kind of not differentiate between a character and an actor, you're doing some work, you know what I mean? And so maybe Ryan could not differentiate. And that's where maybe his own insecurity and his own feelings of discomfort came from. So this is the complaint that they filed against Blake Lively and Company on January 16, 2025. So we're going to start on paragraph 98. When Baldoni was faced with this demand, he was utterly confused. By the time Lively and Baldoni were developing their intimate scenes together, they had developed a friendly relationship and were communicating often over text message. I'm sure Ryan was thrilled. Anyways, Lively felt comfortable expressing herself and appeared to do so freely. And actually, Blake Lively literally says that. She's like, I appreciate so much that I can talk to you so, like, so freely. I think that's actually almost verbatim to what she said in her text message. And that was in April 2023. So I do feel like this is a husband situation, and Ryan got all up in his feels because the way he obtained, like, his current wife, may have made him a little suspicious of anything because he thinks that men are like him, that they won't be faithful to their own wives. But Justin Baldoni is faithful to Emily. It's not Justin's fault that Ryan didn't know how to be faithful, even though he claims that he got together with Blake Lively after the fact and they were friends for a long time. But I'm like, how long of friends were you? You got married like within a year of knowing each other. So I, I don't know about that. Not to say that I don't think a long time is a year. I'm sorry. Maybe it's because I have a lot of friends that I've had, like I had since I was a kid. And I know not everybody has friendships that last that long, but to me, a year is not a long time. I think this was about an insecurity of a husband that couldn't trust his wife because he assumed that everybody conducts themselves as a man like he does. And he knew how he conducted himself with Blake Lively while he was married. I think he was worried that the same way that he was unfaithful, that somehow Justin Baldoni would be unfaithful to Emily. But I don't think he had to worry about that at all. The last thing he wanted to do was kiss this woman. Just kidding. Obviously, that came later after she acted the way she acted. She took photos of Baldoni holding and comforting her newborn in her home. Baldoni filmed her uncontrollably laughing with him as they rehearsed late into the evening, often delirious with exhaustion. It feels too rom-com-y how it's written right now. I think that what they were trying to portray was everything seemed to be fine between him and Blake. There wasn't friction. There wasn't like this discomfort. And then all of a sudden, I think an insecure husband who likes to yell at people just reared his ugly head, I guess. I don't know. I don't know if that's true, but it's something I imagine could have easily happened. Nothing about their interactions suggested Lively was uncomfortable around Baldoni. Though confused by this demand and denied the opportunity to revise the return to production's demands to make them factually accurate and less misleading, Wayfarer had no choice but to sign the document and did so, knowing no such instances had occurred. Now, here's where I will say Wayfarer is hurting itself by saying Wayfarer in place of It Ends With Us Movie LLC. Because one of the things that they tried to say to Blake Lively was, well, you never put It Ends With Us Movie LLC in your lawsuit, your original CRD. But even in their own lawsuit, they interchange Wayfarer with It Ends With Us Movie LLC. So the question is, yes, technically It Ends With Us Movie LLC is a separate entity, but you're speaking as if it's the same. Later, Lively references in her complaint instances that were shockingly mischaracterized and in no way inappropriate or unprofessional. For example, in response to a proposal from the intimacy coordinator that Baldoni's character Ryle not orgasm after he satisfied Lily, Lively remarked, "I'd be mortified if that happened to me," personalizing the character's sexual act. Baldoni, following Lively's lead in what he understood to be an attempt to connect with and develop their characters, marked that those have been some of the most beautiful moments between himself and his wife. They then moved on. In another instance, as Lively and Baldoni were developing their scenes, Lively said, I don't want it to look like porn, and then offered up that she had never seen porn in her life, a very personal fact. Baldoni complimented her and said that's wonderful, because unfortunately he was first exposed to it when he was 10 years old and struggled with a porn addiction for a period of his life. He writes openly about this in his book, Boys Will Be Human, written for young boys, and Man Enough, written for men, addressing pornography as a societal problem. Anyone who knows or has done any research on Baldoni would have knowledge of this, and it can in no way be characterized as inappropriate, especially after opening the door to the discussion by disclosing something highly personal. At every turn, Baldoni was entrapped. Moreover, Heath, who had nothing to do with this exchange and has never had a porn addiction or even mentioned porn in Lively's presence, was falsely and knowingly lumped into this accusation. So I'm not going to read this particular paragraph because we have read this for another point that they made, actually point number 1. So you can pause and read for a refresher if you want. So pause and read. And I'm just going to start reading 102 and 103 that just says these brief exchanges were distorted beyond recognition in the 17 points list of return to production's demands that Lively served on Wayfarer. Still, without conceding that anything remotely inappropriate had happened, Wayfarer agreed to this condition so that they could resume production. So we're moving on to the timeline because the first amended complaint for Wayfarer, exactly the same information, so nothing new to offer there about the point 3. So we're going to start on April 21, 2023. Baldoni meets with the intimacy coordinator to discuss how to shoot the sex scenes. It was important to him that the intimacy coordinator be a woman to help craft sex scenes that would speak to the book's mostly female audience, i.e., be written from the female gaze. His notes from this meeting are pictured below and were later shared with Lively during one of their script writings meetings at her New York apartment. These notes would later become the basis for Lively's complaint, in which she states that Baldoni would talk about his own sex life and insert gratuitous scenes with Lively's character orgasm. A scene in the notes, these mentions come directly from the intimacy coordinator notes, goes down on her, orgasm, foreplay, the clit test. Ideally, these conversations would have taken place directly between Lively and the intimacy coordinator directly, as Baldoni had requested. However, Lively declined to meet with her, leaving Baldoni in the less than ideal position of having to relay these notes to Lively in her penthouse. So this is the notebook. I've never read this before, and it's kind of hard to read, but you can see what he's talking about. The notes show that this was discussed with the intimacy coordinator. But you know what stands out to me? This section that says, give the fans what they want. You know what? It makes me think of the dance montage. She's like, don't give them what they want. Don't get, like, they want it, but don't give them what they want, or whatever she said, right? And then the statement she says later on about how, like, fans don't know what they want until you give it to them, or something like that. So it's kind of interesting. She says that when it literally has this line in this notebook of give the fans what they want. And Blake Lively's like, no, don't. Like, don't give it to them. So May 5, 2023, Donnie emails the intimacy coordinator his notes on sex scenes after discussing Lively's comfort level with her. And emphasizes that the way these are shot and what is shown will be a collaboration between Baldoni and Blake. Due to illness in Lively's family, this is what I talked about earlier in this video, the Vegas shoot scheduled for May 8, 2023 was canceled. Additionally, because of production delays and strikes, none of the outlined sex scenes were filmed during the May through June 2023 production window, Phase 1. These scenes were all postponed to Phase 2 of production, January 5, 2024 through February 9, 2024, which resumed 7 months later. So now we're moving on to Justin Baldoni's deposition. So this one starts off with a question. Did you ever have a conversation with anyone else, cast, crew, production on It Ends With Us, about Lily and Ryle climaxing together other than Christy Hall? Justin says, I think I spoke about every single intimate sex scene with our intimacy coordinator. And question says, okay, so Miss Hall, your intimacy coordinator? And he says, and then eventually Miss Lively. Okay, and then Miss Lively. Yes. Do you ever recall having a do you recall having a conversation with Miss Lively about this specific line here? I don't recall it being about this specific line. Do you have any recollection of having a conversation with Miss Lively about the scene in which you discuss you and your wife? Objection. I remember a conversation, not discussing a scene, where I brought up my wife. Yes. Come on, Justin. We know you bring up your wife every 5 seconds. So you're like, I remember a conversation where I brought her up. I don't think it's about this, but no, you bring up your wife on the regular. And I think it's cute, but it seemed like Blake Lively was not as much of a fan hearing about your wife. Something in her recoiled, it seemed like. And what do you recall bringing up? The day before I had a meeting with the intimacy coordinator to go over ideas for all of these scenes, I wrote down a bunch of notes from that meeting. The following day, I had a meeting set with Miss Lively to specifically talk about the sex scenes. That was the actual point of the meeting. In that meeting, I read through and walked through the notes that I had discussed with the intimacy coordinator. One of them was an idea that had come up where Ryle and Lily were making love. Lily had climaxed or had an orgasm, to speak frankly here, and Ryle did not. And the idea, as the intimacy coordinator and I were talking about things that women have not seen on camera yet, things that would be unique, that would be attractive to the female gaze, which was the purpose of that meeting, the idea was that Ryle would then stop and say, just watching you was enough, or I'm good, or something like that. And when I shared that with Miss Lively, she then made it personal and said, oh God, that would mortify me if that happened to me. To which I then responded, as one does when you're two grown adults with children who are married, in the context of talking about sex scenes with a movie that you're making with a person who is understanding that there are going to be sex scenes in a book based with a lot of sex in it. The only thing you really have to share are personal experiences. So I said, oh, well, some of the most beautiful moments have been when that's happened with me and my wife. And that was it. So you were interested in shooting the scene from the female gaze? I was interested in shooting all the sex scenes from the female gaze. Did Miss Lively have a female gaze? I would imagine so, if she's a female. Did you believe she had one? Of course. Did you believe that the gaze was important in coordinating ideas about how these various scenes should be shot? Objection. Absolutely. That's why I incorporated all of Miss Lively's ideas without hesitation. And that was in the beginning, obviously. There was hesitation after a while when she just up and snatched everything, but in the beginning. Now we're going into Jamie Heath's deposition, and it is much shorter, and it's truly just this. Okay, did she talk about wanting to neither her nor her employees to hear personal experiences of other people's sex lives, including as it relates to spouses or others? What number are you reading, please? 3. I think she said something about that. And that's all that's in Jamie Heath's deposition. So now we're looking at Blake Lively's response to the Rule 56.1 statement. Paragraph 92 says, such discussion took place in the context of planning and choreographing a sex scene. Lively first volunteered her own personal experience before Baldoni shared his. So Blake Lively responded that she disputed. And then she redacts all the reasoning for her disputing it. She doesn't show any sources for it, so she hides the source even. I don't know why. Usually they leave off the portion that has like the cited source, unless there's no cited source. I don't know if that's the reason why everything's redacted, including the source reference. The next one is Lively requested there were to be no discussions of personal experiences with sex or nudity. And she says, undisputed, that Lively requested that there be no discussions of personal experiences with sex or nudity, including as it relates to conduct with spouses or others. So then paragraph 189 says, Lively has previously volunteered to Baldoni details of her personal sex life, and she responds, disputed. The cited testimony does not support the assertion that Lively volunteered details of her personal sex life. Baldoni's testimony at most claims Lively spoke about a hypothetical situation. Sorry, she said not her personal experiences. Ma'am, you said you would be mortified if that happened to you. That means it's never happened to you. It means you've never orgasmed without your husband first having his. So, yes, you didn't say that that was about your life, but you said you would be mortified if that happened. Allegedly. That's what he says you said. She said, it's just a hypothetical. Is it? Or is it a confession? So what are my closing thoughts? around this whole thing. I think that she's dangerous to talk to as an actor. Because if she likes you, she won't have any problems with these conversations. But if she doesn't like you, she won't even let you have a professional conversation about building out your character without accusing you of SH. I find her dangerous. She's done scenes that are far more gratuitous than this. And so with herself, even, as what I've heard, right? In Another Simple Favor. Never watched it, but maybe, again, like people said, the only person that felt safe to be in one of those scenes with her was just herself at this point. So, which I'm sure Ryan Reynolds is thrilled that nobody wants to touch his wife with a 10-foot pole, because I think that's exactly what he wanted, you know, for her to be eternally at home. To me, it's a discussion about your characters. And if you can't differentiate between yourself and your character, it's going to cause these confusions. And I know some people are so offended at the idea. How dare you think that a person who has had a career as long as Blake Lively would not know the difference between herself and her character? But I'm going to say I feel that way because of the way she speaks about Lily and the way she has spoken about it in various ways. It gives the impression that she couldn't differentiate between the two. I would say that because of how Ryan Reynolds even talks about it. I think she did have a difficult time, or maybe her husband had a difficult time separating her from the character she was playing, and did not like that her and Justin in the beginning seemed to be fine with each other, and maybe too fine for his taste, and needed to find a way to cause drama where drama was not necessary. But, I keep going back and forth. I don't know. I go back and forth between, like, they were always planning this, to, did he just get jealous? Or we don't have enough. For me personally, I don't have enough information in regards to motivation or when all of this started happening. Were they plotting from the beginning? There's like points available to me that makes me go back and forth. But I'm looking forward to Blake Lively showing us her deposition, because I heard that she did not request it to be sealed, which means hopefully we will get to see her deposition. And finally, we get to hear Blake Lively in her own words, not just through her lawyer's words, which can, again, sometimes you can say something to your lawyers and it gets lost in translation. So there will be no issues, because these will be straight from Blake Lively herself, which I'm hoping will allow us to just hear from her without all the other filters. Now, obviously, she probably got coached really, really well, so that I don't know if we'll get very many meaty things at all, but hopefully we'll find out something new from reading her deposition. So hopefully that comes out soon. I keep saying hopefully, but I guess that's my basic gist. I don't know who would ever trust to be in a room with Blake Lively again without feeling like, anytime, I think there's some folks that claim to believe Blake Lively, but would probably want to self-protect just in case. They'll say to your face, I trust Blake Lively, but behind her back will probably be like, can we make sure cameras are rolling? Can we have some sort of protection? I cannot be in a room with this person privately, because now I'm afraid. Because right now she likes me, but one day she might not. But at the same time, because of the way that Justin Baldoni and Wayfair has handled this case, I don't think that her and Ryan Reynolds hopefully will ever do this to anybody else again. So that's my thoughts on this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it. If you enjoyed this video, also be willing to consider subscribing to me. I will continue on this 30-point document series. Also, I'm starting a new series called 17 Questions with Bocce, which is weekly. I put up interviews with different content creators where I get to ask 3 staple questions, and then the 14 other questions will come from TikTok and YouTube, and specifically also from my botchy buddies or botchy besties, which are my members on my YouTube channel. And so hopefully you enjoy those videos too. Once they become available, the first one is going to be made available this upcoming Friday. All right, thanks. Have a great one. Talk to you later. Bye.